To all the Wall Street entertainment analysts out there that cover companies like Disney, and of course to Mr. Nelson Peltz out there at Trian, this one is for you. You guys and girls have a chance on November 8th during the Disney earnings call to ask some serious questions. This is a company that should not be as broken as it is, and it's broken in a multitude of places. Quite frankly, I was ahead of the curve by months, if not nearly a year, on asking the real questions about Disney+. Subscriber growth is fine and dandy, but it can't be the end-all be-all. Where's the actual value proposition? Where's the profits? Where's the positive operating income for such an endeavor? An endeavor that has racked up over $10 billion in losses since its inception back in 2019. Crazy enough, you guys started asking the right questions 6 or 12 months later after I started doing that, because you guys also started realizing that something was wrong. Having 160 million subscribers globally is great, but if you're not making any money off of it, what's the point? Then we've seen attention turn to other things. Theme parks have been struggling. Linear broadcast has been on a decline, and Disney seems to have been behind the 8 ball on that one as well, now struggling to catch up. Looking at selling off pieces of things like ESPN or even entire chunks like ABC. I was also the guy that kept telling you months before you started asking questions, hey, Bob Iger isn't exactly all that you have him cracked up to be. I even went so far as to talk about how Bob Iger was likely sabotaging Bob Chapek behind the scenes. And sure enough, you guys finally got there, and I appreciate that you did. But now it's time to listen up again. And when I see articles like this from Bloomberg, has Bob Iger lost the magic, it gives me heart that you folks are going to be asking the right questions on November 8th during that earnings call. And sure, it's great that Bob Iger wants to quiet the noise in the political battle that Disney started. But while you're wondering about this bizarre $60 billion CapEx plan for Disney to spend on what seems to largely be more hotels and more timeshares in international parks, you might be missing an even more important question for the Walt Disney Company. And that is regarding Disney's most dire and underlying fundamental problem right now. Disney, as an entertainment company, seems to be creatively bankrupt. And you guys, on November 8th, had better start asking Bob Iger why and what he's doing about it. Listen up. Renegade Online. Well, folks, welcome back. Another great day here at Valiant Renegade. It's great to see all of you out there once again. And if you are like one of the many folks watching this video, not yet subscribed to this channel, please take a moment and turn that little red subscribe button to gray. Hit that like button, hit that notification bell, share this sucker out on the social medias, and of course, please do leave a comment before you head out the door today. And join us every Sunday afternoon right here on Valiant Renegade at 6 p.m. Eastern for the live show. And make sure you set your notifications for Wednesday, November 8th at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for that Disney earnings call. Bloomberg recently asked the question if Bob Iger has lost the magic. I would extend that to all of Disney, but that's certainly from Bob Iger's tutelage. He's been there for nearly 20 years. And though Bob Iger certainly has a track record of turning in some successes of the Walt Disney Company, he's also been the architect of his own failure. And quite frankly, as I've stated many times, I'm not at all convinced that Bob Iger can be the one to fix the problem. Barbenheimer aside, it was the summer from hell for Hollywood executives, and none more so than Bob Iger. In July, he and his fellow moguls Gulfstreamed to the jagged green mountains of Sun Valley, Idaho for their annual retreat, where between power lunches and tandem bike rides, they debated media deals and the impact of artificial intelligence. But the big reveal was that Iger, who in November emerged from retirement to temporarily lead the Walt Disney Company. Temporarily, huh? Sure. If it was as temporary as Disney intended when they brought Iger back in late 2022, Nelson Peltz wouldn't be coming back. Disney was worth $160 billion, or less than half of what it had been when he left in 2021, and the company's problems seemed to be getting only worse. Iger was burning through his 2-year agreement with no clear successor in sight, and the Disney board chose the elite confab to announce that the man who had once made the company unstoppable had agreed to stay on until 2026. Once, but no more. I'll remind folks once again, quite clearly, that the architect of all of Disney's problems right now is Bob Iger. Bob Iger, who Hollywood told us was so vastly superior to Bob Chapek when it came to dealing with actors, writers, and Hollywood in general, well, that didn't seem to hold up very well into 2023. From the article again in Bloomberg, within hours, Iger went from being the champion of creatives to an avatar for everything wrong with the entertainment industry in 2023. Quote, there he is, sitting in his designer clothes and just got off his private jet at the billionaires camp, telling us that we're unrealistic when he's making $78,000 per day. How do you deal with someone like that who's so tone-deaf, rallied Fran Drescher, president of SAG-AFTRA, which represents 160,000 actors. The article goes on to say how everything went sideways after Bob Chapek took over when Iger left the first go-round. But as again, I continue to remind folks that a lot of the problems that Chapek walked into were inherited from the prior administration. This didn't just start happening overnight. Now, granted, Bob Chapek was not a perfect CEO by any means, but I think he was a guy who was trying to look out for Disney and the shareholders above and beyond anything else. I think he was someone who recognized that Disney had problems and was willing to take actions that, frankly, Bob Iger didn't care for because, well, they didn't suit his legacy when he did. Bob Iger suffered more setbacks in 11 months, according to Bloomberg, than he did in his first 15 years at Disney's helm, with some problems unforeseen and others years in the making. Disney is now a business saddled with a dying TV division that Iger all but put on the block in that CNBC interview in July, declaring it, quote, may not be core to the company's future. Disney Plus has lost the company more than $2 billion so far this year and is bleeding subscribers as it tries to raise prices. Now, granted, most of that subscriber loss is at Disney Hotstar in India, which, of course, Disney is now looking to sell off, which is probably a good move for them. Setting aside last year's Avatar, The Way of Water, which is now the subject of a breach of contract suit filed by the film's financier, its movie division is suffering from a string of box office bombs that call into question its most prized franchises. And this is key, because it's not even really Avatar, The Way of Water aside. Disney does not own that property. That is owned by Lightstorm Entertainment and James Cameron. Disney merely inherited those contracts for film distribution when they bought Fox, or when I should say, they overpaid for Fox by reportedly tens of billions of dollars. At least Nelson Peltz seemed to think so. And that's why Nelson Peltz is back for a second round of a proxy fight, and we'll get there. But that string of box office bombs is something that I want you guys and girls out there on Wall Street to really focus on, because that is not something that Disney is used to or should ever be accustomed to. They have had rousing box office success for decades on end, starting with the resurgence of Disney animation back in the 90s with people like Shore and Menken that were making such movies as Beauty and the Beast, The Little Mermaid, Aladdin, so on and so forth. All of these things were big hits for Disney, and those characters to this day are still big hits in the theme parks and big draws for their core demographic, which is young girls being brought to the parks by their moms to meet their favorite Disney princess. Later on, Disney would finally expand its strategy, bringing in other franchises for $4 billion apiece, mostly in the way of Marvel Studios and Lucasfilm, which was primarily Star Wars, because they wanted to expand that reach to the boys. But of course, what has Disney done since? Now, the MCU was already well underway once Disney made that purchase. There was a lot of things already in the till. Disney carried that out to its natural progression, which was Infinity War and Endgame, thanks to folks like Ike Perlmutter, which, by the way, of course, Disney has since run off from the Walt Disney Company, leaving Kevin Feige solely in charge of what was a multi-billion-dollar mega hit for a decade. And we've all seen what the purely controlled Kevin Feige brand of Marvel has wrought since then. Marvel Phases 4 and 5. And those box office disasters, well, that's on his watch. Then, of course, there's Star Wars. And what have we gotten from Star Wars? Well, we bought it for the boys, but now we're going to change it and make the Force female. And Disney sat back and said, sure, Kathleen Kennedy, go ahead and do that. We've all seen how that has worked out. The toy sales, merchandise sales, and even the box office revenues for those Star Wars films, though it started out really strong with The Force Awakens, absolutely collapsed by the time we got to The Rise of Skywalker, and since then, Disney has yet to put another Star Wars theatrical release even into pre-production.
That's according to a number crunch by prominent YouTuber Valiant Renegade, who argues that many of Disney's recent so-called hits barely broke even or flat out tanked.
And with Marvel Phases 4 and 5, we got the same thing. Kevin Feige decided to pivot into expanding the audience, quote unquote. The problem for Disney is that typically means abandoning the existing audience that has, in this case, for over a decade, been paying billions and billions of dollars of Disney bills. We got a more diverse cast of B, C, and D tier Marvel characters in Phases 4 and 5. It's almost as if what I said 2 years ago, that Kevin Feige was going to kill the MCU, came true. Because why? Well, he wanted to bring his own brand to the screens as opposed to the brand that was commercial viability for Disney. And we've all seen how that worked out. By the way, The Marvels opens in theaters in just a few weeks. And in case you didn't know, Wall Streeters, Disney and the rest of the industry is expecting The Marvels to turn in perhaps the worst box office of any MCU film in, well, forever. Disney declined to make Iger available for an interview to Bloomberg, but members of his inner circle and current and former Disney employees who declined to be named as they aren't authorized to speak publicly describe Bob Iger as overwhelmed and exhausted. And considering what he's put himself and his company, Disney, through in the last several years, I can understand why. Before the pandemic, the TV business generated more than a third of Disney's revenue and more than half of its earnings, but Iger now has few choices but to spin off to private equity firms that can ride its last years of profitability. MoffettNathanson says the TV profit could fall by about $2 billion in 2023 and says Disney should have curtailed spending years ago. Quote, "No other company we at MoffettNathanson have covered has seen this kind of decline," says Michael Nathanson. How did previous management not see this coming? Bob Iger was the previous management. Disney Plus was losing hundreds of millions of dollars every quarter, and Iger needed the business to be in the black by 2024 to honor a pledge the company made to Wall Street. The cost of making shows had soared, and all the streamers were dealing with shareholders no longer interested in subscriber gains at all costs. I told y'all so. Way before that point. In Disney's case, the losses were exacerbated by Bob Iger's own actions years earlier when Disney acquired BAMTech, the streaming technology that would eventually run Disney Plus for $3.8 billion. The technology, however, as it turned out, was more expensive and less efficient than those operated by rivals, according to current employees. Let's go back to this cost of Disney Plus shows. That's one of the things that even caught Wall Street analysts off guard early on. I heard people on earnings calls asking questions about the expenses of some of these Disney Plus and, frankly, any streaming enterprises. A lot of folks out there seem to think that Disney was going to sit on its laurels, just use its massively expansive library of existing content for $5, $6, $7, $8 a month. And most users probably would have wound up being happy in all those billions of dollars of extra expenses that they've incurred over the last several years to produce proprietary content, things like Marvel and Star Wars shows that, quite frankly, with very rare exception, have performed mediocre at best in places like Nielsen and Samba TV ratings. Well, Disney may have been better off not doing any of them at all. And no surprise, we've seen Bob Iger in recent weeks and months talk about pulling back drastically on the number of shows coming from Marvel and probably even Star Wars. Disney's movie division was the envy of Hollywood during Iger's first term, now also in distress. Earlier in his career, Iger had long favored a strategy of fewer, bigger films that had the potential to become hits, but in his later years, the ambition to feed Disney Plus fatigued fans with too many sequels and spin-offs. The majority of Disney's big-budget movies over the past 2 years have failed in theaters, while other studios have had successes, including Barbie from Warner Brothers, which became the highest-grossing film of the year, Universal Pictures' Oppenheimer, among the highest-grossing R-rated movies in history. Disney's summer was a washout, and don't forget, we also had Super Mario Brothers. And this is where the problem really lies, Wall Street. This is Disney's creative bankruptcy. It's not that these films are coming out too frequently or they're oversaturating the market per se. It's simply the fact that the films are bad. A lot of folks like to talk about superhero fatigue when it comes to movie franchises, but I've never been a very big believer in that. It's simply bad movie fatigue. And that goes for Warner Brothers as well, as people like David Zaslav try to clear the decks from the previous regimes at Warner that fed him things that came out this year like The Flash, which was a huge flop, and Aquaman 2, which promises no better. But Disney's doldrums run across all the studio lines: Pixar, Walt Disney Animation Studios, Lucasfilm, at least for that's coming out on Disney Plus, for things like Ahsoka, which turned in 1/4 the performance of House of the Dragon on HBO a year ago, about a half or a third of that of Stranger Things Season 4 from Netflix, at least according to Samba TV's measurements. And all three of those shows had relatively similar production budgets per episode. So if we want to look at superhero fatigue as a real thing in the market, as some type of secular headwind, well, the problem seems to be with Disney is that there is Disney fatigue, particularly creative Disney fatigue. Their creative well is dry. Their creative talent pool is empty. And nothing seems to be getting better anytime soon. And this is one of the biggest questions that needs to be asked on November 8th, in my opinion. And sure, Disney executives can come up with radical shakeups as a crisis hits its centenary celebrations. Yeah, Disney is celebrating its 100 years of Disney. And look what they tend to celebrate in their most recent video to promote this. It's a lot of their classic characters. There's not a whole lot of the new characters in there, or at least none that you'd really think would last long term. Movies like Turning Red and even Lightyear, or how about Strange World? None of these things are really moving the needle for Disney. They're not selling merchandise. These are not characters that are being produced that are going to engender 5, 10, 15, 20 years worth of IP success and merchandise sales for Disney, like we've seen from characters like Snow White, Sleeping Beauty, Ariel, Cinderella, so on and so forth. Those characters have been around for decades and are still incredibly popular. Disney is not replenishing that. There's nothing new that's come out from Disney in almost the last decade, with the exception of maybe Frozen, that is really stuck in the zeitgeist. And that's Disney's biggest problem. They've run off all their creative talent. Everybody remember John Lasseter?
I believe you have to do three things really well. Tell a compelling story that is unpredictable, keeps the audience on the edge of their seat. You populate that story with really appealing and memorable characters, and put that story and those characters in a believable world. Believable for the story you're telling, not realistic. We're not interested in reproducing reality.
Lasseter got run off by Disney for a bunch of, dare I say, thin, if not outright bogus nonsense Me Too charges. In fact, it was so thin and so weak that he's right back working again at Skydance Animation right now. And who is Skydance Animation partnered up with? Well, guess what? It's Apple. That's right. John Lasseter and many of the other Pixar executives that Disney bought when they bought Pixar have since left Disney and are now basically back at Apple. John Lasseter, for years, once Disney had acquired Pixar, had his hand on nearly every single Disney animated production, whether it was from Walt Disney Animation Studios or from Pixar itself. Look at the decline in quality since John Lasseter has left. Look at the projects that have been greenlit and come out. And remember, these movies usually take, especially the animated ones, 3 to 4 years from the time they're conceived to when they actually hit the big screen. Lasseter left around 2018. Look at where we're getting now. Disney is creatively bankrupt, and for all the discussion we can have about misappropriating, say, $60 billion foolishly to more theme park hotels and more timeshares around theme parks, you've got to ask yourself, what is actually going to be in the theme parks 5 to 10 years from now that's going to drive the traffic to go to those theme parks and then stay at those timeshares or stay at those hotels? I don't know what it is right now. Disney's creative bankruptcy, honestly, is the biggest problem it faces moving forward. Disney Animation, Disney Pixar, is not turning in anything that's wowing audiences. Marvel Studios has all but collapsed in terms of popularity thanks to very poorly made films in phases 4 and 5, with no characters that are engendering fan interest, and the merchandise sales have almost completely fallen off. Just ask some of their merchandising partners out there, people like Hasbro, they'll tell you. And then, of course, there's Lucasfilm and Star Wars, which has basically petered out into nothing. Disney spent $4 billion buying the most valuable intellectual property for a movie franchise in Hollywood history and then proceeded to destroy it. They just closed their own $400 million Star Wars hotel, and it looks like on most days in Galaxy's Edge, you could shoot a cannon through there and not even hit a mosquito. So wake up, Wall Street. Disney's got a lot more problems than just linear broadcast. they've got a lot more problems than just Disney Plus profitability. You see, if the Marvel and Star Wars shows coming out on Disney Plus were far more popular and driving billions of dollars of new merchandise sales and bringing in tons of new subscribers each and every quarter still, well, we'd be having a very different conversation. And even things like The Mandalorian, which launched Disney Plus in 2019, 10 million subscribers overnight, Mando Season 2 a big success. Well, look at what happened in the quarter that Mando Season 3 released earlier this year in 2023. Disney Plus actually lost 300,000 subscribers in North America, its most core of core markets. 300,000 again, roughly, in the next quarter. Wonder what they lost this quarter in North America. Guess we're going to find out on November 8th. It's hard to be profitable when you keep shedding subs, but it's even harder when you can't keep those subscribers engaged, not only watching the content, but digging down into their pockets and actually spending their hard-earned money to buy the Disney merchandise that otherwise should be associated with a popular show. Disney seems far more interested today in pushing social and political agendas into content than they are actually making films and Disney Plus shows that reach the most valuable audience, the broadest audience possible. That's what they should get back to. Just making good quality storytelling, something that Disney likes to brag about still in 2023, but doesn't seem to have the chops to back it up. If you're more interested in making political or social statements by race swapping your most popular characters, say like Ariel, or for example, Snow White next year with Rachel Zegler, which already looks like it is going to tank miserably, just thanks to Rachel Zegler herself, well then you're not actually doing what you should be doing for your stockholders, in my opinion. I think you should be making products that everybody is going to enjoy, that nobody is going to question. Wait, that doesn't look like Ariel. Wait, that doesn't look like a Snow White movie. Where's the Seven Dwarfs? Oh, Disney didn't want to offend Peter Dinklage. Good Lord, this is where we are right now. And if Disney doesn't get their act together, all the money that they can spend on hotels, theme parks, timeshares, anything else, shaving off pieces of ESPN, or getting engaged in a new NBA contract next year for $75 billion, all of it will be for naught. Because if they're not replenishing the families that are out there, then not much is going to go well for Disney in the long run. Does anybody out there also notice how often Disney or how Disney coverage analysts out there are talking about the Disney adults these days in articles and analysis? It's a little concerning to me, isn't it? Why are so many Disney adults populating the parks? Where are the kids? It used to be mostly kids that we would talk about. If the demographics for Disney are aging out and they're not being replenished with the new younger generation, Disney's got another problem on its hands. But we'll find out soon enough. Wall Street, you're up on November 8th. Mr. Peltz, you're up on November 8th. And we're counting on you to ask the right questions. So please, for the love of God, take a moment and do that for all of us. We'd love to see Disney get back to its greatness, but it's not going to happen without you guys. Thanks for joining us today, and thanks for staying tuned. And until next time, take care. Make sure you're subscribed to Valiant Renegade and join us every Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern for the live show.